The city skyline shimmered under stormy clouds as alarms blared through glass towers. Elizabeth Gray said, "Everything we built is collapsing." The boardroom screens flashed breaking news, a leaked report revealing financial crimes tied to her empire. Marcus Lee said, "The press is eating you alive, Elizabeth." Her knuckles whitened on the polished table as betrayal twisted her gut. Cameras outside the headquarters captured chaos, protesters shouting, shareholders calling for blood. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, as she realized someone close had detonated this. In the control room, Lauren Pierce whispered, "This wasn't supposed to happen tonight." The ground beneath Elizabeth's power shifted, leaving her breathless, hunted, and furious. The manipulative rival's shadow loomed, already maneuvering for her throne. The boardroom descended into furious chaos as executives shouted over one another, papers scattered like fallen leaves. Elizabeth Gray said, "Silence, or we all drown." Marcus Lee slammed his palm on the table. "Shareholders are calling for your head." Lauren Pierce's quiet voice cut through. This leak was planned. The storm outside pounded against the windows, amplifying every heartbeat. A sense of betrayal hung heavy in the air as Ryan Cooper stumbled in with urgent reports. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the empire Elizabeth built now trembling under hidden enemies. Richard Kane's unseen presence guided the storm from afar, his schemes already in motion while her trusted circle fractured under pressure. Outside the glass fortress of Gray Industries, flashing cameras blinded Elizabeth Gray as reporters shouted accusations. Elizabeth Gray said, "This company will not fall tonight." Marcus Lee whispered harshly, "Your enemies are circling like vultures." Lauren Pierce scanned the crowd nervously, noting unfamiliar faces among the press. The storm's wind whipped Elizabeth's hair as she stepped onto the podium, her voice steady, but her hands trembled. Ryan Cooper muttered under his breath, "The leak wasn't random, it was a message." Across the city, Richard Kane watched the broadcast, a satisfied smirk on his lips. The storm of ambition and betrayal had only just begun. In a quiet corridor away from the flashing cameras, Lauren Pierce leaned against the wall, whispering, "Someone inside sold you out, Elizabeth." Elizabeth Gray's voice broke slightly. "I built this empire with trust." Marcus Lee growled, "Trust is a currency they already spent." The distant thunder punctuated the tension as Ryan Cooper entered with urgent data. The building creaked under the storm's force, mirroring Elizabeth's cracking resolve. In another part of the city, Richard Kane raised a toast to the chaos. The world Elizabeth commanded felt suddenly fragile, her closest allies potential traitors. The city lights blurred through the boardroom's drenched windows as the storm raged. Elizabeth Gray stood alone at the head of the table, her reflection fractured in the glass. "They want my crown," she whispered to herself. Marcus Lee entered, jaw tight. "The market is in freefall," he warned. Lauren Pierce quietly added, "The leak points back to someone in this room." Ryan Cooper's voice trembled as he revealed, "Shareholders are threatening legal action." In his secluded office, Richard Kane swirled his whiskey, whispering, "Let the empire burn." The room's silence screamed louder than any storm. In the dim light of Elizabeth Gray's private office, storm clouds rolled beyond the windows. Marcus Lee slammed a folder on her desk and said, "You trusted the wrong people, Elizabeth." Elizabeth Gray's voice wavered, "I will find who betrayed us." Lauren Pierce's whisper carried urgency. "The betrayer planted this disaster weeks ago." Ryan Cooper rushed in with trembling hands. "Shareholders are demanding answers tonight." The tension thickened as Elizabeth's empire trembled beneath them. The city outside was a mirror of turmoil, lightning splitting the night. Richard Kane, miles away, lifted his glass in silent celebration as his schemes tightened their hold on Gray Industries. Shadows lengthened across the polished floor, and for the first time, Elizabeth felt the full weight of isolation pressing down on her shoulders. In the archives beneath Gray Industries, the fluorescent lights flickered above endless rows of locked cabinets. The air was heavy with secrets as Ryan Cooper whispered, I found something they didn't want us to see. Lauren Pierce's eyes widened. This could destroy Richard Kane. Elizabeth Gray steadied herself. Then we use it before he destroys us. Marcus Lee's voice was sharp, or this leak will finish what it started. The thunder outside rumbled like a warning as Ryan opened a hidden file revealing damning evidence. Far across town, Richard Kane watched stock tickers plummet, his smirk unbroken. Betrayal was no longer speculation. It was war. In a shadowed corner, cafe far from corporate towers, Elizabeth Gray met the disillusioned mentor, Jonathan Price. Jonathan Price's voice was low. I've seen ambition eat giants alive. Elizabeth Gray tightened her grip on her coffee cup. I won't be another casualty. Marcus Lee waited outside, scanning the street for threats. Lauren Pierce's message buzzed on Elizabeth's phone. Richard Kane is moving faster than we thought. Ryan Cooper's hands shook as he read the evidence again. The rain tapped against the window, and the cafe's dim lights flickered, echoing the instability of Gray Industries. Jonathan Price leaned in closer. Every empire falls from within. Elizabeth Gray felt the words cut deep. A warning wrapped in bitter experience. In a dim warehouse, lit only by swinging bulbs, Elizabeth Gray and Marcus Lee watched as Lauren Pierce revealed a hidden portfolio. Lauren Pierce whispered, "The shadow investor controls more than we imagined." Ryan Cooper's breath caught. This changes everything. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Richard Kane isn't acting alone. The sound of distant thunder underscored the revelation. Stacks of crates loomed like silent witnesses as tension crackled in the air. Outside, rain hammered the tin roof, drowning out the city's noise. Far away, Richard Kane raised a toast with an unseen ally, their silhouettes merging in darkness. The stakes had shifted again, and Elizabeth's resolve hardened. In Elizabeth Gray's penthouse suite, the storm outside painted streaks of lightning across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Lee paced, muttering, "We're running out of time." Lauren Pierce's voice was steady. "The underdog might be our only chance now." Ryan Cooper hesitated. "Are we sure we can trust them?" Elizabeth Gray stood silent for a moment before saying, "Trust is a luxury we no longer have." Far across the city, Richard Kane poured another whiskey, murmuring, "They're exactly where I want them." The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as betrayal closed in from every side. The next move would decide whether Gray Industries survived or perished. The newsroom buzzed like a hornet's nest as breaking headlines splashed across every screen. Elizabeth Gray stood behind a podium, her image broadcasted nationwide, while reporters whispered of her downfall. Richard Kane leaned into the cameras with a feigned sympathetic tone. "I only want what's best for Gray Industries." Marcus Lee watched from the sidelines, jaw tight with fury. Lauren Pierce muttered to Ryan Cooper, "He's manipulating public opinion." Outside, thunder rolled as the storm's fury grew. The world watched alliances shift in real time as betrayal tightened its grip. Elizabeth's voice cracked but steadied. "This company will not bow to vultures." The stakes were higher now, loyalties fracturing, and every word was a weapon. Late at night, Marcus Lee rifled through encrypted files in his apartment, sweat beading as rain lashed the windows. Elizabeth Gray's voice crackled through his phone. "Did you find anything?" Marcus whispered. "The sabotage is internal, someone close." Lauren Pierce appeared on his screen, eyes hard. "Richard Kane already controls half the board." Ryan Cooper texted urgently, "Evidence suggests a mole." The thunder outside punctuated every revelation as Marcus pieced together the web of deceit. Across the city, Richard Kane toasted alone, his smirk growing. The walls around Gray Industries were closing in, and Marcus felt the weight of impending disaster press against his chest. In a deserted parking garage, Ryan Cooper met Elizabeth Gray under flickering lights. Ryan whispered, "I have proof Richard Kane's spies are inside our walls." Elizabeth's breath fogged in the cold air. "This will turn the tide." Marcus Lee's car idled nearby, ready to bolt if things went wrong. Lauren Pierce stood watch at the stairwell, scanning for threats. A distant thunderclap echoed, amplifying their anxiety. Ryan handed Elizabeth a flash drive, its weight heavier than gold. Far away, Richard Kane sipped whiskey, unaware his secret was slipping. The city seemed to hold its breath, every shadow a potential traitor. The glow of a single desk lamp filled Elizabeth Gray's penthouse study as she stared at the flash drive. Ryan Cooper delivered. Marcus Lee's voice was tight. "This is the proof we needed." Lauren Pierce whispered, "But using it could trigger war." Ryan Cooper shifted uneasily. "Richard Kane won't see it coming." The storm outside lashed against the glass, rattling the room. Elizabeth slid the drive into her laptop, her reflection fractured on the screen. Far away, Richard Kane watched surveillance footage, suspicion creeping into his smirk. The balance of power wavered, the air heavy with imminent conflict as alliances poised to crumble. The boardroom was eerily silent as Elizabeth Gray walked in, shoulders squared despite the storm raging outside. Marcus Lee stood beside her, glaring at the empty seats of absent allies. Lauren Pierce whispered, "They're already choosing sides." Ryan Cooper spread out documents, his hands trembling slightly. Elizabeth's voice cut through the silence, "We take back control tonight." Across the city, Richard Kane raised his glass in another toast, whispering to himself, "Let them fight. It only makes me stronger." The thunder outside mirrored the brewing war inside the walls of Gray Industries. The clash of power was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived. The financial markets convulsed as Gray Industries stock nosedived, screens flashing crimson warnings across trading floors worldwide. Elizabeth Gray gripped the balcony railing, the storm's wind tearing at her suit. Marcus Lee said, "Investors are pulling out in waves." Lauren Pierce muttered, "Richard Kane is orchestrating this collapse." Ryan Cooper's voice trembled, "We're hemorrhaging billions by the minute." Far away, Richard Kane watched charts plummet, whispering, "Perfect." Lightning split the sky, illuminating Elizabeth's determined face. The world she built crumbled beneath her, and every second felt like free fall. The city roared below, a symphony of panic and betrayal as power shifted in real time. In a private office dimly lit by a single lamp, Elizabeth Gray confronted Richard Kane face to face for the first time since the leak. The air between them crackled with animosity. Elizabeth's voice was ice. "You've destroyed lives for power." Richard Kane's smirk didn't falter. "Business rewards the ruthless." Marcus Lee waited outside, fists clenched. Lauren Pierce monitored security feeds, her jaw tight. Ryan Cooper's whisper on the comms urged caution. Thunder boomed outside, shaking the glass walls. For a heartbeat, the city's chaos fell silent, as if waiting for the outcome. The clash of titans had finally begun, and only one would walk away unbroken. In the aftermath of their confrontation, Richard Kane seized control of Gray Industries' shipping division overnight. Elizabeth Gray stormed into the operations center, rain still dripping from her coat. Marcus Lee said through clenched teeth, "He's outflanking us on every front." Lauren Pierce scanned the monitors, "Half our routes are compromised." Ryan Cooper stammered, "The betrayer fed him inside access." Across town, Richard Kane swirled whiskey, eyes glinting with triumph. Elizabeth's voice was steady, despite the chaos. "Then we fight smarter." The storm raged outside, mirroring the battle within the walls of Gray Industries. Time was running out, and every decision carried lethal stakes. In a shadowy underground parking lot, Elizabeth Gray stood under a leaking pipe, the storm echoing above. Marcus Lee said, "Jonathan Price warned us, every empire cracks from within." Lauren Pierce whispered, "The betrayer is closer than we feared." Ryan Cooper handed Elizabeth a decrypted message. "It's proof Richard Kane had help inside." Thunder rolled like distant drums of war. Far away, Richard Kane toasted unseen allies, smug confidence in every gesture. Elizabeth's chest tightened as realization set in. The next strike could come from anyone she trusted. The storm's fury masked the city's silent shift in power, a shift she had to stop. The night sky cracked with lightning as Elizabeth Gray returned to the boardroom, drenched but unyielding. Marcus Lee stood ready, documents spread across the table. Lauren Pierce said quietly, "The betrayers set the final trap." Ryan Cooper added, "Shareholders will abandon us by morning." Elizabeth's voice rang clear, "Then tonight we fight for every inch of this company." Far away, Richard Kane whispered over his glass, "The end game begins." The storm's howl outside merged with the pounding of Elizabeth's heart. The empire she built teetered on the brink, but defiance burned in her eyes. This was no longer business, it was survival. The storm had broken, but inside Gray Industries the tension was worse. Elizabeth Gray faced her fractured team in the dim conference room, her hands flat on the table. Marcus Lee said, "The betrayer's name is on this report." Lauren Pierce whispered, "I can't believe it's someone we trusted." Ryan Cooper trembled as he placed the evidence on the screen. Elizabeth's voice carried steel, "Richard Kane won't win, not tonight." Outside, the city lights flickered, hinting at the chaos spreading through the markets. Somewhere distant, Richard Kane lifted his whiskey glass and muttered, "The final act begins." The betrayal was no longer rumor, it was undeniable. In the empty trading floor of Gray Industries, the echo of footsteps mingled with the hum of dormant machines. Elizabeth Gray said, "This company is worth more than their schemes." Marcus Lee replied, "The betrayer crippled us, but we can strike back." Lauren Pierce scanned the scrolling data feeds, her expression hardening. Ryan Cooper whispered, "If we fail tonight, it's over." Lightning illuminated the deserted floor, casting long shadows across the terminals. Far away, Richard Kane watched their every move through hidden surveillance, savoring their desperation. The tension in the air was electric, the fate of Gray Industries hanging by a thread. In a dim underground safe house, Elizabeth Gray gathered her loyalists for one final gambit. Marcus Lee unfolded a city map, marking key positions. Lauren Pierce said, "Richard Kane's network reaches deeper than we thought." Ryan Cooper's hands shook as he uploaded the evidence to a secure server. Elizabeth's tone was unyielding. "We expose him tonight, or we lose everything." The walls seemed to close in as thunder rumbled overhead. Far across town, Richard Kane raised a glass to unseen allies, unaware the trap was set. The safe house flickered with failing light, a fragile sanctuary before the storm's next blow. The storm raged as Elizabeth Gray and Marcus Lee breached the secure server room of Gray Industries. The hum of machines filled the air while Lauren Pierce monitored the entrance. Ryan Cooper said, "This is the last chance to upload the proof." Elizabeth's hands shook only for a moment before steadying. "We finish this tonight." Marcus Lee scanned the files, muttering, "He's covered every track." Lightning illuminated the walls as data transferred. Far away, Richard Kane sipped whiskey in his penthouse, unaware the tide was turning. The betrayal was laid bare, but the risk of exposure could destroy them all. The boardroom doors swung open, and Elizabeth Gray stepped inside, soaked from the rain, as lightning cracked beyond the windows. Marcus Lee slammed documents on the table. "The evidence is out." Lauren Pierce whispered, "Richard Kane won't forgive this." Ryan Cooper's voice shook. "Shareholders are already calling." Elizabeth spoke with iron resolve, "Let him come. We've exposed him." Across the city, Richard Kane's smirk faded as the news flashed across his monitors. The storm outside mirrored the chaos to come. Gray Industries was bruised but not broken, and the battle for its soul had entered a new, brutal phase. The boardroom lights flickered as Elizabeth Gray summoned every remaining ally for an emergency session. Marcus Lee slammed a report onto the glass table. "The company is bleeding out." Lauren Pierce whispered, "Richard Kane has half the board under his control." Ryan Cooper's voice was tight. "If we delay, he takes everything by dawn." Elizabeth's gaze was unyielding. "Then tonight, we take back Gray Industries." Outside, the city writhed beneath a midnight storm, lightning exposing fractures in the empire she built. Far away, Richard Kane sipped whiskey, already anticipating her failure. The final stand had begun, and there was no retreat. In a fortified control room deep within Gray Industries, alarms pulsed red as data streamed across walls of monitors. Elizabeth Gray said, "We hold this company or we lose everything." Marcus Lee barked orders to redirect resources. Lauren Pierce monitored external feeds, her eyes sharp. Ryan Cooper's fingers flew across a keyboard. Kane is launching a hostile maneuver now. Outside, the storm howled like a warning. In a dark suite elsewhere, Richard Kane raised his glass and muttered, "Let the pieces fall." The company's future balanced on a knife edge, every second carving history's next chapter. On the rooftop helipad of Gray Industries, rain hammered the concrete as Elizabeth Gray faced the skyline, her empire trembling below. Marcus Lee approached. "They're abandoning ship." Lauren Pierce shouted over the wind, "We still have leverage." Ryan Cooper arrived breathless. The underdog rallied key staff. "They're on our side." Elizabeth raised her chin. "Then we fight to the last breath." Lightning streaked across the sky as Richard Kane watched from a distant tower, his silhouette lit by flickering screens. The storm's fury matched the battle brewing within the city, a final chance to turn the tide or fall forever. The trading floor glowed with chaotic energy as Elizabeth Gray and her allies made their final desperate moves. Marcus Lee barked commands, redirecting assets to block Richard Kane's takeover. Lauren Pierce scanned volatile data. "He's pushing harder. This is a full assault." Ryan Cooper's voice trembled. "The staff is panicking." Elizabeth stood at the center of the storm, her voice cutting through the noise. "We stand our ground." Across the city, Richard Kane clenched his jaw, realizing she wasn't breaking. The thunder outside matched the clash of empires within. Every flicker of the screens marked a decision that could save or doom Gray Industries forever. The storm's fury reached its peak as Elizabeth Gray entered the darkened boardroom for the final confrontation. Marcus Lee stood beside her, unflinching. Lauren Pierce whispered, "This is our last chance." Ryan Cooper placed the final documents on the table, his hands steady now. Elizabeth declared, "Tonight, we reclaim our future." Outside, lightning carved jagged scars across the sky. Far away, Richard Kane watched news feeds flash with her defiance, his smirk faltering. The air was electric with anticipation, the climax of betrayal, ambition, and survival. The cost of power had never felt so heavy, nor victory so uncertain. The city's skyline was a broken reflection of triumph and ruin as Elizabeth Gray stood at the shattered windows of the boardroom. Marcus Lee said, "Gray Industries survived. But at what cost?" Lauren Pierce whispered, "The staff is scattered, trust is shattered." Ryan Cooper muttered, "The markets won't forget this war." Elizabeth's voice was heavy with exhaustion. "Survival has a price." Outside, the storm subsided, leaving the city eerily quiet. Across the city, Richard Kane stared at his monitors, his smirk gone, fists clenched in silent rage. The empire had burned, and no one walked away unscarred. In the ruins of the trading floor, Elizabeth Gray walked among silent terminals. Marcus Lee followed, saying, "They'll rebuild without us if we falter." Lauren Pierce ran her hand over a cracked monitor, whispering, "We held them off, but barely." Ryan Cooper's voice was hushed. "The underdog is already stepping forward." Elizabeth paused, her gaze distant. "Let them, maybe it's time for a new beginning." Far away, Richard Kane poured whiskey, but his hand trembled. The air was thick with endings and fragile hope, the aftermath of ambitions cost lingering in every corner of the broken floor. At a modest office downtown, the underdog gathered the surviving staff. Elizabeth Gray arrived quietly, watching as they rallied without her. Marcus Lee stood beside her, murmuring, "They don't need us to lead anymore." Lauren Pierce smiled faintly. "Maybe that's a good thing." Ryan Cooper said softly, "They're stronger because of what we endured." Elizabeth's eyes glistened as she whispered, "Then Gray Industries will live on, just not through me." Across the city, Richard Kane stared out at the skyline, the weight of his loss pressing in. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it belonged to new hands. In the twilight haze, Elizabeth Gray walked alone through the empty Gray Industries lobby, her footsteps echoing against marble floors. Marcus Lee appeared behind her, saying softly, "We gave everything." Lauren Pierce stood by the revolving doors, offering a faint, reassuring smile. Ryan Cooper adjusted his tie nervously. The underdog has already called a staff meeting. They're ready. Elizabeth glanced back at the once mighty building, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. This chapter is closed. Far across town, Richard Kane stared into a dark glass of whiskey, the weight of his ambition finally heavy. The building seemed to breathe its last with her departure. Night cloaked the city as Elizabeth Gray paused on a deserted street outside Gray Industries, the building a silent monolith behind her. Marcus Lee stood under a flickering streetlight, his breath visible in the cool air. Lauren Pierce's phone buzzed quietly with new alerts, but she ignored them. Ryan Cooper said quietly, "It's over, at least for now." Elizabeth's gaze lingered on the skyline, her voice barely a whisper, "For now." Miles away, Richard Kane's phone buzzed with a new message, and his lips curled into a thin, dangerous smile. The storm had passed, but the threat of another brewed quietly on the horizon.